Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria LaFont.
I'm Hannah Wright, and today our episode is all about gluten, at least mostly about gluten. There's a lot of information, and we've compiled a lot of information, so this will probably be part one of a two-part episode.
Yeah, now that I figured out how to record, it took me like too long to find the record button. Okay, I'm just thinking, are there like any updates that we need to give people before we start talking about gluten, or should we just dive in
Man, are there updates?
to the glut of gluten information?
There is a lot. I don't get it.
Oh, just because it's a glut of gluten information.
Okay.
That's it.
I think we did a little update on Brian Johnson last time, but
yeah, I keep seeing his ads. But you know what? I will say this: we are going to have the second episode in April as wellness trends. So right now we have got a couple wellness trends, in the bucket that we're looking at. But if there are any wellness trends that you're seeing that you're like, is methylene blue really, all it's cracked up to be? Like if there's something you're seeing that you have questions about, email us. It's influencetodeath@gmail.com, or you can just leave a comment on Instagram. It's at influencetodeath on Instagram. And it's also, I always forget, Hannah, to tell people hey, we do have content that's just for paid subscribers. So for just $5 a month or up, you can become a subscriber, and that money directly supports us.
Yeah, so we can actually do better research to share with y'all, because it does take quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
And if you're able to leave us a review on our streaming platforms, it helps so much with bumping us up, so that hopefully someday we'll be on the suggested list of health or wellness podcasts. That would be amazing. And this work can reach more people.
Yeah.
And thank you all for just continuing to listen to us and be here. And I think we hit over 10,000 downloads, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very large milestone for us. We didn't know we would get to that point. So thank you. I'm still amazed that people are continuously listening, and we just love you. Thank you.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much. Okay, so I know you have history of gluten info, right?
Yeah. So do we want to do the history first, or do you want to explain actually what gluten is?
Oh, yeah.
So people, because I get that question a lot. And so we'll talk about this in the bias, but I am gluten-free. You are gluten-free.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about why. But if I'm at a restaurant or with a friend, they're usually like, what is it? What is gluten?
Do you know,
let's talk about what it is.
I can't help but to think of that South Park episode where they talk about gluten, and have you seen that episode?
No.
Okay, we're going to link to that episode in the show notes. I love cartoons, but I'm not a huge South Park fan, but that episode is so freaking hilarious if you are in the wellness field. It's very unholy, so I'll just put that out there. There's some very unholy moments, but it's really funny. So, okay, yeah, we hear this term gluten-free and gluten sensitivity, and you're going to talk about that more in the history. It is an enormous trend. And that has kind of sustained now for decades. It's still around. I just went to California to this retreat center. Everything that they served was labeled either as containing gluten or gluten-free. If you're at hotels now, gluten-free options are on the menu. It's around. So yeah, it's a great question. What the hell is gluten? So a gluten, that's how my grandmother would say it. A gluten. Yeah.
Are you a gluten? Oh, she's a gluten. I've definitely heard that. I'm in Tennessee. Yes.
I used to live in Hawaii, and she'd be like, when are you coming home from Hawaii?
Oh,
yeah, she was awesome. Italian, actually, she ate a lot of gluten. So, okay, gluten falls into the category of what's called a prolamine. So a prolamine is part of a plant, right? But it is a part of the plant that is a storage protein. And the reason that it's called a prolamine is because it has a high amount of these certain amino acids, which are protein building blocks, called proline. Okay. I also want to say it's proline and maybe cysteine were high as I was reading about this. And what it stores primarily is nitrogen. So this kind of gets into the cool sort of high level biochemistry of nutrition, we kind of forget that macronutrients are made of elements. Like, do you remember the chart of elements? How many elements are there? Like 108?
Something
I
like that.
didn't research this before, but like, the like hydrogen, oxygen, helium, blah, blah, right. We eat macronutrients that are made of those elements. And this is cool. I just have to say this because this is like fascinating to me. Those elements came from space. Okay? Like, we don't like think back that far, but there was a first generation of stars that had like ammonia and methane and shit that's toxic to us. But then they evolved and there was a second generation of stars. I had no idea that this is where I was going to go, everybody.
Well, neither. I'm here for it. Like, keep going.
So then there's a second generation of stars, and those stars, they just happened, in their chemical processes of being stars, they created all of the elements that are in our periodic table that we're used to seeing, right? Helium, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the elements that keep us alive. They think what happened is that as those stars started to kind of break up and the different matter went throughout space, our planet was hit with those elements through, like asteroids, like space debris, essentially. It ended up on Earth. And then we kind of like evolved from whatever we came from, like single-celled amoebas with that like environment of elements. That is where our macronutrients come from today. Okay.
So cool.
It's so cool to think about it. Like, to me, it like puts us in perspective, right? Like, there's a biochemistry sort of a foundation that says like all life came from the second generation of stars, and that's not like metaphorical, that's absolutely true. So in grains and in plants, the prolamin portion of the plant stores nitrogen, and nitrogen is what differentiates protein from carbohydrates and fats. The biochemistry is they're different makeups, but carbs are made, okay, let me see now if I can remember this. Oxygen, hydrogen in different formations, but then proteins contain nitrogen. We should
contain nitrogen. Yes.
Yeah, but carbohydrates and fats don't.
Right.
Is it oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen, I think, are the three main elements of all macronutrients. Would you check me? And I mean, I could totally be wrong. I haven't.
While I'm checking this, I hear a sound. It might be your mic rubbing on something. It sounds like a shooting egg, like a.
It's probably my big old collar.
Oh, yeah, your big old collar.
Here, I'll kind of like shift my headphones up a little bit.
Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen.
Carbon, hydrogen.
Phosphorus and sulfur.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Fatty acids are carbon and hydrogen atoms with a carboxylic acid group. Yeah, it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are the three elements that make up carbs and carbon. I should have remembered that. And fats. But then, yeah, the differentiator for protein is nitrogen. So the prolamin in the plant is the storage protein for nitrogen, and it's for the plant. It's a protein that makes it so that the plant, yes, exactly, can grow. So these different prolamins have different names depending on the plant that they're present in. So in barley, it's hordeon. I may totally be mispronouncing that. In rye, it's secalin. In corn, it's zein. In sorghum, it's carafin. In oats, it's avenine. We're a little bit more familiar with avenine. And in wheat, it's gliadin. Okay. So gluten is a portion of gliadin. So it's just interesting to kind of know, like, that's sort of like the purpose of gluten is to help a plant grow, and it's a protein that is present specifically in wheat. So I'm trying to think like if there are any other specifics around that. I think that's probably it. I dug a little bit into, like, there are some wellness folks who talk about gluten as a lectin. Have you seen that?
No, but it's not a lectin.
Yeah, so I actually saw it on Sarah Ballantyne's website. We had her on to talk about seed oils. The studies that I looked at, it said that gluten may have lectin-like properties. It's one of the ways, though, that gluten has sort of been like pigeonholed into this problematic category, because lectins also had this like very problematic reputation. I don't really want to say the way that Sarah Ballantyne wrote about it, because I wonder if her opinion has changed. That article was from 2018. But this study said, it has lectin-like properties. So,
And we haven't had an episode on lectins, but I think we've mentioned it, and that has been suggested by listeners because lectins are their own thing found in, especially in like grains and legumes and stuff, and really like vilified, like they're really bad. And there's influencers who are all, their whole thing is like a lectin-free diet. Lectins are ruining your health, and lectins actually have pretty cool health benefits, which is
yeah.
not talked about. So maybe we can go in depth with that, like in a different episode, like talking about lectins.
Yeah. And just to clarify, lectins are also plant proteins. So it's interesting, like, right, they might have similar properties, but
Hmm.
I don't see them as being exactly the same thing. I'm also not a plant biochemist.
Right.
So
You may just not
we'll
know.
see. But so
If
just as
someone is
kind of
listening and they're like, "You're wrong," please tell us.
yeah, totally. If you are a plant biochemist, you have our email address. Yeah. So that's what gluten is technically.
Hmm. Okay, so now I just want to touch on the history of mostly like gluten free diets, because wheat, so gluten containing grains like wheat, have been a part of human diets for a really long time now. I mean, basically, what, like 10,000 years ago when we started like eating a more agricultural type diet, that became a staple. Obviously, the type of the grain has changed a lot over all of those years. So it's different than what it used to be, but it's still a staple. I mean, it's a huge crop all over the world, like a main protein source for a lot of people in the world. So what I came across from I pulled this actually from celiac.org, and we'll put the link in there. And they were going off of Alessio Fasano, who is a very, very well known gluten researcher. So if you wanted to learn about gluten-free diet, celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and you go to PubMed and you put his name in, you'll find a whole lot of stuff. So he
And like
works,
really balanced research. Let me
it
like
is really
say,
balanced.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's very like, here's what is.
Mhm.
So appreciate his research.
Okay, he's a medical doctor. He works at Massachusetts General Hospital, and in like gastroenterology, I guess, mostly in pediatric gastroenterology. His research is interesting. It's easy to read too. So from that, I just want to like cite my source. That's where I'm getting this from, so y'all know.
Our
Um,
gluten boyfriend. That's what I call
yeah, he's awesome.
him.
Um, the first known case of celiac disease, as far as we know, that was documented was 2,000 years ago, described by a Greek physician. And I think that's where that word came from. Hold on, let me find it so I can try to say it correctly.
That's cool. Yeah.
But it was like GI symptoms like diarrhea and not absorbing, and probably I'm sure there was like weight loss associated with it. So he used the term celiac, from the Greek word koliakos, which means abdominal. I
Oh,
might be pronouncing that wrong. So that's where that came from. And later on, many, many, many years later, celiac disease was better understood, probably around the 19th century. Um, and then during World War II, this is super cool to me at least.
it's cool.
In yeah, there was food shortages, and so a Dutch pediatrician named Willem Karel Dickey, he is thought to be like the pioneer of the gluten-free diet, because of those food shortages, he started to notice this pattern that when there was less wheat in the diet, it corresponded with less kids dying who probably had celiac disease, who had some kind of malabsorption issue. So they just weren't eating it. And then he was like, "Oh wait, this is what's making you like super sick." And then from there, the gluten-free diet was developed. And we'll link to, there's this really cool little paper from the journal Gut, from 1993. It's just like an editorial article, but it has a picture of him and with kids, and it kind of talks about, it was like after he died to commemorate his death, talks about a little bit the history of like how long it took them to figure out what kind of diet was appropriate for these kids who were really sick and weren't absorbing nutrients and had GI problems. They, for a while it was like, oh, it's going to be an all fruit diet or bananas or all these different things, and sometimes they would get better and sometimes they wouldn't get better. I think one text even mentioned like, unfortunately, like toast, like dry toast was suggested, which I'm sure like made them much worse. And so it took a little while, to put that together. But eventually it was like, okay, all gluten-free, that's the way to go. And
Interesting.
I think I'm I mean, this is just my guess from what we've read, is that like for a while it was just used for people with who were known to have some kind of malabsorption or celiac like disease. And it wasn't until around 2005 or so that it started to get really trendy. And so that's how long ago was 2005? 25 years ago?
20 years
20
ago.
years ago?
Yeah.
It's still really trendy. It's like you said, it just continues to grow.
Yeah.
And Alessio Fasano, I think he projects that the rate of celiac disease actually is going to continue to grow too, especially as communities who are still not fully industrialized and aren't eating more like refined grains and things like that. It's possible that they could develop it,
Mhm.
later years. And so it's kind of, I guess, shifting and growing and may continue to grow, um, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, that's celiac disease. There's also non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which we'll touch on a little bit, and how they're different.
Yeah, and wheat allergy, which
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
is like, I sort of wondered, like, with this episode, is wheat allergy really like appropriate? But I think because people are so confused about the different ways that a person can be reactive
Hmm.
to wheat or gluten, it's worthwhile just to say, like, some people are not necessarily, people are reactive to gluten in different ways or to wheat in different ways. So we can talk about that during this episode. Have you ever, I think I've asked you this, have you ever read that book, Sapiens by Yuval Harari?
Yes, I've read some of it. Yeah.
I think this is where I picked this up, where he talks about when humans became um, not nomadic. What's the opposite of not nomadic? Like it,
Cultural or what's that? I know there's another word.
yeah, like farmers, agriculturalists. Essentially, like the way he writes about it in that book is that wheat like trapped us and rice trapped us so that it could proliferate, right? Because it was just this like wild grain for hundreds of thousands of years that would be found along the trails that humans would use to go from place to place as nomads. Rice, even more so because it's so labor intensive to grow rice, I think, even more so than wheat. And then once we started to settle down in one place, we took that seed grain. Is that how you would call it? I think it's like we eat the kind of the seed is the part of the wheat that we eat. We created agriculture as with that as the main staple. And so the way he talks about it is that essentially like wheat made us do certain things to like make it grow versus the other way around, which is super interesting to think about.
It is.
Um, yeah. And I mean, at that time, this is such like a conversation and like a touchstone point in like the world of kind of like ancestral nutrition and paleo nutrition. You hear different influencers say like, oh, like oats are like poverty food, or grains, or like,
Oh, what
they like,
peasants ate. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
I like love that little split that somebody made where I think I won't, trying not to name names. We're still sticking to that. Somebody's like, I've actually heard a few different influencers say it, but like, oh, oats are, totally this peasant food. And then it splits to Kipchoge, the guy that, he like is the fastest marathon runner of all time. And they're like, oh, what did you eat for breakfast? And he's like, all like chill. He's like, step back. He's like, oh, oats. Like oatmeal is my favorite food. Like, okay, I mean, it's not like a direct correlation, but it is pretty funny. But there were changes that happened in humans at that time. There was also a lot of changes that happened over, God, probably, like 1,000, 2,000 years. So I think it's an interesting point to discuss, but not to put so much like weight on that grains, or specifically this one protein in grain, has like wrecked our health as humans, and that we were some like, model of health as hunter gatherers who never ate grains. It's like, okay, our diets definitely changed, but we also did eat grains when we were hunter gatherers. They were around. So I don't know. I just think about that as far as like the history goes.
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you
Yeah.
think? I mean, do you think humans should eat gluten, Hannah, generally?
Yes,
Me
I
too.
do.
Yeah, I'm
But
with you.
I think that makes a lot of people really sick. I think there's a lot of nuance to that outside of the scope of like someone with celiac disease. It
Mm-hmm.
does affect your gut permeability, which is a whole other like thing to talk about. And so, but um, before I like studied more and learned more, I thought that everybody should be gluten free because I did think it was like really bad for you, and that was really influenced by my personal bias because it makes me really sick. And
Mm-hmm.
so and then once I read papers on the benefits of wheat and the nutrients it contains, and beyond just like, having vitamin E, B vitamins, things like that, and protein and fiber,
Mm-hmm.
it being associated with other like beneficial chemical pathways in the body, like how it's plays an influence in your hunger hormones, and how your glucagon like peptide GLP-1 is regulated, and things like that we don't really think about,
Mm-hmm.
so it may have a beneficial effect on blood sugar and weight control and appetite and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that like the type of gluten containing grains that most people eat are really poor quality and have very little nutrition.
Yeah.
And it is true that it is a lot different now. It's highly processed, and maybe that I say maybe it isn't good for you. We know that. We know it's not. But just to for health professionals or influencers to say everyone needs to be gluten free is really misleading and
Yeah.
not helpful for people at all, and it puts a lot of fear into your food choices, which isn't good. So do you want to talk about should we just talk about like I know there's going to be a part 2.
We've got a lot to say.
Gonna put that out there.
And
But
yeah.
should we talk a little bit about like is gluten-free food healthier, and like a little bit about the health benefits? And then do you want to talk about our biases too in this episode to follow our typical format?
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of with you on, I mean, what you described is essentially my experience also. I remember you telling me, you don't have to share it here, but the story, I think you and your husband were rock climbing and you like finally put it together. Like, oh, I think that was when you were like, I think gluten is so bad for me. I just had like,
Yeah, yes. Okay, so let's do our biases or our personal experiences. So basically, I haven't eaten gluten besides being accidental in probably almost 12, 13 years,
Mhm.
since 2011. So I don't know how long
Yeah,
that is. I'm trying to think.
12 years.
So, celiac disease runs in my family, and I had a lot of health issues when I was younger. One of the biggest ones was that I was extremely underweight. It was really hard for me to gain weight. I had stomach problems. I had not like I could go into the whole list of symptoms and neurological things too. Anyways, I didn't know what gluten was. I had no idea. And I remember, now I feel so bad. I had this roommate before I went gluten free when I was in my really early 20s. And if I'm sure she's not listening to this. I'm
She's going
sorry.
to email us and be like,
She was gluten free, and we lived in this big house with like 7 people, actually more than that, I think. It was in Portland, Oregon. And she was gluten free. I had no idea what that was. But like when I interviewed to be a part of the house, like to be a roommate, they were like, you can't have like gluten stuff in the house or bake with it because if it gets in the air, it can make her really sick. And I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. I was like, she's super extra. She's really dramatic. This is not a thing. I'm so sorry to her.
you're from
I'm
Tennessee
sorry.
too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I mean, that's how we grew up.
Yeah.
Like
Like it's
I
not
mean,
everything.
I was like Italian, but like the only problem that we had when my grandmother died is that our family fought over her ravioli. The money, the furniture, whatever. Nobody gave a shit, but we were like those ravioli in the freezer. I mean, there's like part of like our culture at, you have biscuits, there's like the
Yeah.
gluten is part of that. So I can totally see hearing about it for the first time and being like, that is total horseshit.
Did and I was such an asshole. I was just really dismissive, not to her, but just kind of like whatever in my head, whatever, okay. And oh god, I'm not even gonna go into details because that makes me sound like a terrible person. But anyways, I at that point, I had no idea what it was. And it wasn't until a couple years later, a family member was diagnosed with celiac disease, and I learned what it was. And I was like, oh, and before then, I was kind of noticing the pattern. When I eat
Mm-hmm.
this, this happens. When I eat this, this happens. But I wouldn't accept it because I loved gluten containing stuff so much that I
Yeah.
couldn't even picture my life without it. But then I had this like moment where I was like, I've always said if I could just find the medication that would make all of my symptoms go away, I would happily take it for the rest of my life. And so I was like, I'm just going to try. And it was amazing how fast it got better.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never been tested because I don't want to eat gluten again for that extended period of time. And maybe someday I will and just like test and see what happens. I don't know. But yeah, there was this story, the one that you're referencing. I don't know if people want to
You
hear
don't
this.
have to tell it. I mean, I think poop stories are really funny, but other people might.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell it. Y'all can just use your imagination.
It's the reason that it was so like funny and hard is because like I think you and is it okay if I say your husband's name
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
podcast? Also, people may not know this. Hannah and I have husbands with the same name, very similar interests, very similar looks. Like we essentially married like doppelgangers, and then we became dear friends and coworkers.
And they've never even met each other. They don't know each other.
Yeah, at all. When if they meet, like a black hole is just like going to open in the
Hmm.
pavement. Um, yeah, I think the reason it was like so difficult is because like you all were camping and you had this total
Yeah, all we were
problem and
eating was bread and like canned chicken. Like it was very wheat
camping
heavy,
food.
yeah,
Yeah.
camping food.
And you're
Yeah.
like in an environment. I think anybody who has had GI issues, and this was my story, like my whole family, nobody's diagnosed celiac, but like it's like a joke that our guts work in a way that is very like immediate. That would be the nice way to say it. On my mom and dad's side, it's like a funny joke. And I had the same thing where like I remember like driving home from places and being like, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. Like, this is not going to happen. So, anybody who's had that experience can just, like imagine, like, okay, you're like camping and you have that experience, or at any time, it's like, and then when you take the food away, it just like is so much better. Yeah, I had the bias for years where I was like, I don't think people should eat gluten. But I'm like you, like we moved to Boston and there was this like amazing, ground their own grain, made bagels in front of you, bagel shop. And I was like, I have to eat those bagels. There is nothing that will stop me. But my symptom, the main one was rosacea. And so just, it was like a vanity metric more than anything. But then, of course, I saw my GI stuff absolutely improve. And I'm sure, like, the thing is when people have an absorption issue, whether or not you can see it in their weight, there are other factors that are affected, like your bone mineral density and your ability to build lean protein, like muscle mass on your body. It's like your teeth health. I mean, oh my God, Hannah, that was a huge one for me. I believe that what happened for me is my celiac was activated in my early 20s when I was working in California from a mix of different influences and metal toxicity and stress, or whatever. And when that happened, I was 24. I had never had a cavity. I went to the dentist and I think I had like 12 cavities. I was terrified. I had never had a shot in my mouth. It's like, this grown ass woman being like, oh my God, you're going to give me a shot. And until I went gluten free, how many ever years later, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, I had cavity after cavity, like every time. And then when I went gluten free, they were gone. Like,
Wow.
knock on wood, I'm 42. The last time I had a cavity was like right before I went gluten free. I think that was in like 2018. So
That's amazing. It's really interesting. Maybe we can like kind of like go into a little bit the various symptoms or save that for later, but that like for me, mine was migraines. Besides like gut stuff, I
mm-hmm.
had insane, I mean, it was absurd. Like I had a migraine every week, sometimes multiple times a week. I had a headache every single day for
Mm-hmm.
years. I was just like, this is just how life is.
Oh
And the
God,
amount
yeah.
of medication I took,
Yeah.
now thinking back, I'm just like, oh my God, like I hope that something terrible doesn't happen to my health like later on. But
No,
because
yeah.
I just ate Advil and ibuprofen, and like then if I had a migraine, I took prescription medication. And then it got to the point where I was taking too much and they were like, you can't take this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then they prescribed me like some other type of medication for chronic pain to see if that would help. And it
Wow.
was just no one ever was help me think, well, could it be something else that's making you this sick? Like, why do you have this many headaches all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And that anyone who suffers from migraines know it really impacts your quality
Oh,
of life. Like
horrible.
you
Yeah.
can't function. And so figuring out that was what it was like
Yeah.
my whole life changed. It was like a whole new life, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, in that way, it's like, okay, so it makes sense that I think both of us had that, like, oh my God, gluten is bad. And then you learn more and you start to like, I think this is the case with a lot of topics that we cover, right? Like there's these themes, and this is one. It's like you have your personal experience, you draw from that. Then if you go on to get more education and you are open to like critically thinking through these different topics, you like step back and look at general population, because by and large that's who's going to be coming into your office, right? It's like you may like niche down into a market of like working with people who are celiac even, but like different people are going to search you out and you read research that's done on certain populations, and then you kind of start to look around. Like I look now, I'm like, most people in my life eat gluten and they're totally fine, there's no problem. Andrew actually jokes at restaurants, he's like, bring me her extra gluten, I'm going
that's
to eat.
what Andy says.
Oh my God. Okay. We are seriously married to the same man.
And even if you have, so for instance, I'm going to use my husband as an example. He has both celiac, like both of the genes activated, the HLA, DQ8, I think.
Yeah.
I have one. He has
Weird.
two, which makes it much more likely that you're at risk for developing celiac disease.
Right.
And so when we found that out, I was like, you have to go get tested like right now to make sure you don't have silent celiac because that could be really bad. And they said he didn't.
Wow.
And it's really interesting because, you know, that's just one personal example, but like you could have the family risk and then not get it. You
Yeah.
know, you really have to have this perfect storm of
Yes.
influences and events to trigger it basically.
Right. I think like, so I went, this is actually a hilarious story. I went to the gastroenterologist because I had some symptoms. And it was this like young, beautiful guy who had just graduated from UC Berkeley and moved to Boston. And he totally had to give me a rectal exam. And I was like, I remember they checked my blood pressure, and I've never had high blood pressure. And my blood pressure was a little high. And she was like, what's going on? And I was like, that beautiful dude that is my doctor has to stick his finger at my butt. I told the nurse that. I was like, wouldn't that make your blood pressure a little high? Anyway, he was awesome. And I was like, hey, I think I have like HLA, God, I can never remember. It's like
Yeah. One of
DQ8, and
yeah.
then there's different ones. Um, and I have symptoms, and I have like severe rosacea that really flares, and he was like, look, I think that this is it, is that if people who have celiac, many of them have those genes.
Mhm.
It's not like those genes give you,
Right.
it's like you're kind of predisposed, maybe would be the right way to say it. But he was also like, look, I'm writing on your chart celiac, like I'm not going to have you eat gluten. And that's
Exactly.
important for people to know. And I think we covered that in our episode with Sarah. We talked about gluten a little. You have to ingest gluten in order for the best tests to give you the best results, the most accurate results. And so, for instance, like now, at least this guy in Boston was like, we don't need to test you for me to just like know that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's good. I mean, that's a step, I think, in maybe the right direction. Because for some people, I think it is beneficial for them to have that diagnosis in order for their health insurance to cover an intervention that they might need.
Yeah, or just to understand and accept yourself that you can't eat this food.
Yeah.
Which also we're going to touch on, like, can celiac disease patients eventually eat gluten, because there are some influencers who tell you can. So we'll talk about
Yeah.
that in a second, but to know, okay, I do have this disease. If I don't change my diet, I could have these really bad health effects later in life. I could have cancer. I could, all of these problems. So because some people have silent celiac and they don't have as many symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that the damage isn't occurring in your, small intestine. So,
Yeah, and then God, yeah, we'll get into like non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I feel like it's the most confusing category,
mhm.
and then wheat allergy. But okay, so people are kind of aware of our biases. I think I'm kind of at this point just like, this is neat. I know I can't eat it. God bless everybody else. Let's see what
Yeah.
happens. I would say this, if I was working clinically and someone came into my office with symptoms that were not resolving and they had tried a lot of different things and they hadn't done an elimination diet, which is, look, if you think like, could I be reactive to something? Gold standard is take it out. I think it's like for 30 to 40 days, like in that kind of month-ish time period. Do along with that, this is important to do some work to sort of soothe your GI. People leave that part out of elimination. You can take foods out and that's great, but sometimes you need the extra support of kind of like giving your gut like a little extra glutamine or like taking certain probiotic strains that are healing for the mucosal tissue. There's like different ways to heal. After that time, if you bring that food back in and nothing is different, maybe you're not sensitive or reactive, but if somebody had a lot of symptoms that were not going to resolve, I would try an elimination diet, but I wouldn't blanket just say everybody needs to not eat gluten. I think that is really reductionist and it doesn't square with what we see in the research literature with what good practicing clinicians see in their office. I mean, it just doesn't square. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh no.
I was just going to say that kind of ties into like the question of, is gluten-free food actually healthier? Because if you're saying everyone needs to be gluten-free and then they're replacing, let's say they are eating like good whole wheat products and they're replacing it with gluten-free breads and pastries and flours that are typically made from more refined grains. And they have other additives to make them seem like they're gluten containing, so they put in emulsifiers and a little extra sugar and some oils and stuff to like help with the texture and taste to replicate like your favorite bread. And those things a lot of times are not good for you. And, eating them sometimes is fine, but if that's like a staple of your diet that you're depending on, like that is concerning to me. And so if gluten makes you sick, then okay, but like if it doesn't, you're like missing out on really wonderful nutrients and fibers and stuff, and we're instead getting in stuff that isn't benefiting your health really.
You know who does a good job of this? Deanna Minnick. Often on her Facebook page, people would just have to search for kind of her like professional page on Facebook. She will post studies. She'll go through different research trends that she's looking at, but about like gluten-free foods, their effects versus gluten-containing foods. I've seen her post that quite a bit. And yeah, Hannah, I mean, just like, was it this week or last week, we were doing work for a client looking at the negative effects of emulsifiers in foods. And it's like gluten-free foods are one of the top containing foods for emulsifiers, and they can be harmful. So, yeah. I mean, I say that, and I have these gluten-free pretzels that I will like lay down on the road and have somebody run over me before you have to like pry them out of my cold dead hands. But also it's like, this is like a huge, kind of point of contention. I think it's like gluten-free can also mean that you eat like meat, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, other
grains.
Glutinous or reactive grains. So it's like, I think though that when you go into the real world, most humans are like, I want a pretzel sometimes, or I want pizza sometimes. But yeah, you can't base your whole food pyramid on gluten-free foods and then be like, I'm gluten-free and that's healthier. It's
Right.
like, no.
Yeah, when you say that, you mean like ultra processed gluten-free foods.
Yeah, there's a difference. So
right.
I think you listed some really important factors to consider with gluten-free being healthier, like arsenic in rice. That's a huge one. A lot of gluten-free foods are rice-based. Lack of fiber. It's important just to kind of consider, what are you substituting?
Right. And then, wheat does have, we've already mentioned this, health benefits to it. It's not just like this bad food. It has lots of micronutrients. It has fiber if it's whole wheat. So it's
B vitamins, vitamin E. So do you see that title? I found this study. It says the nutritional contents and medicinal properties of wheat, which is so funny. It's like, in the world of, kind of like holistic wellness, I don't think anybody would ever put the word medicinal next to wheat. It's just like those two things do not go together. But the review was great. Just looking at, there are nutrients in wheat. And to kind of harken back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like what is gluten? This is a point I don't think I clarified that maybe is important. If people are reactive to gluten, right? There is a way where the body can kind of be like, okay, this protein, gluten, this protein component looks a lot like these other prolamins that are in oats sometimes for people. Like I can't eat oats. I can eat corn just fine, but not oats. I think those are the two biggest cross-reactive foods. We're going to, talk about that. Or, they can't eat hordeine prolamins in barley. It looks similar enough to our body that we react. But I think we kind of use gluten as this like catch-all, and we are aware of the foods where those proteins look enough like gluten that most people will react. So that's it's an important point to clarify. But yeah, wheat and other gluten-containing grains, they are in their whole form wonderful foods many, many times, and we can see nutrient profiles that are beneficial. So
I want to put this, just make sure this is in here. I'm not going to go really into it because it's a lot, but something I came across recently is the link between people who have celiac disease on gluten-free diets and a pretty significant increased risk of them getting non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So when you have fatty liver, but it's not related to alcohol use. Really interesting.
yeah.
And a little bit alarming. And I think like there's a lot more to learn in that area, but it's kind of just like something to be aware of. What's going on there. And, if you're someone who's on gluten-free diet for a really long time, to like maybe take a peek at that research just to be aware of it.
Hannah, it's that study, like it was mostly women. They found fatty liver even in women who they weren't overweight or obese, which is a huge like connection between fatty
That's
liver and
rare to, yeah.
Yeah, on a gluten-free diet. And the increase in risk was a lot. It was enough where I was like, when I go to the doctor, I kind of want to ask for a liver ultrasound because I fit that profile. And the population of women, I think it was like early 40s, mid 40s.
So like what is going on there? Like I have theories. Like one of them is what we just talked about, the poor quality gluten-free products. So like with emulsifiers and preservatives and things like that, those do affect your gut microbiome. Like we know that from looking at research. And so if you've been eating that, those are a mainstay of your diet for 10 years, 20 years, like maybe that could be somehow because your gut microbiome is connected to liver health. That's the whole point of what I'm saying. So like, could it be something with that? And it's not necessarily being gluten-free, because like you said, being gluten-free could mean eating, mostly whole foods, like other grains like millet or oats. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems odd, but I feel like there's a lot of other things contributing.
Yeah, well, it's in that paper in the discussion section. They had two hypotheses. Sometimes I seriously feel like we're on the Muppet Show. Yeah, they talk about the gut-liver axis being altered, possibly in people who are celiac. And then I think kind of their second hypothesis was really aligned with what you're saying. It's like the contents of a gluten-free diet might lead to weight gain and increased lipid intake. But it's interesting because, some of the people were not overweight. And so it's like, well, what's going on? Yeah, they actually said in here, I think this is fascinating. So sorry, I'm going into it. It's like, it's important because let's say somebody's eating a gluten-free diet because they read that they should on Goop or whatever. I think she's one of the main ones, Gwyneth Paltrow. And I'm totally fine saying her name, who she also gave us leeches in popular culture. So whatever, you win some, you lose some. But they are eating gluten-free diet because they think they should, but they actually don't have to. It's like, maybe you shouldn't.
Yes, that's what worries me. And when I saw this, research, I was like, oh, people need to know about this connection, because it just like hurts my heart to think about people seeing a trend like that, or an influencer, and they go fully gluten-free. They swap out all the stuff in their pantry with the gluten-free stuff.
Right.
Also, that's expensive. So,
Yeah,
and
totally.
then it's potentially hurting their health, actually, because they're not doing it in a way that's mindful of their overall nutrient intake, and is instead just focused on swapping gluten out for gluten-free stuff, which
Yeah.
is not like a, you need guidance, or at least an influencer who knows what they're talking about to like explain that to you, you know? So if you do want to like be gluten free, and you, or even if you have to be for celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity or whatever, wheat allergy, that's something to really be mindful of. And like, if you're not sure, please like find a dietitian or a nutritionist who can like help with
Yeah,
that.
and keep an eye on your liver enzymes. Like AST and ALT are commonly run on a metabolic panel.
Hmm.
Like I think like any doc runs whatever. It's like a CMP, like it's going to be on that metabolic panel. That's a pretty good indicator like of your liver health connected to fatty liver disease. So, yeah, I could just copy and paste this into the show notes.
Yeah,
But
let's do that.
it isn't. It's like one kind of like, ooh, should you actually be eating a gluten-free diet unless you have to? Maybe not, because fatty liver will mess you up.
Yeah.
You do not
Yeah,
want
that's
that.
bad news.
Um, okay, should we talk about the influencers who say you can cure
Yes.
celiac disease?
Okay, so a few years ago, I came across this influencer, and I'm not going to say their handle. I haven't even looked at their page in many years because it was so aggravating to me. But she said that she had celiac disease, and that she cured herself from eating the diet that she was also selling in her course.
Hmm. No.
What like aggravated me to no end is that she was like really based on like holistic, and like I'm like natural, and so
Here's what I eat in a day.
this is what I eat in a day. You can buy my course, and I'll just, And so it was a whole thing with like, now she was making her own sourdough and gluten. She was eating wheat again, and she was fine. And before she had all these symptoms, now she doesn't have symptoms. And she
Mm-hmm.
was telling people you can cure celiac disease and eat gluten again. And at that time, I like thought I was gonna have a brain aneurysm. And I was like, should I like message her? I'm not gonna go into the comments. I'm not gonna do it. But I was like, this is,
Could be
and she did
problematic.
have some people who were like, have you actually gotten like a biopsy, or like had them look to make sure you aren't like damaging your intestines, because
Mm-hmm.
you could just not have outward symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if, I hope she did that to figure it out.
From the
Because
proceeds of your course sale.
yeah, like, but please don't tell people, But then for
Yeah.
this episode, I came across this paper that is titled "Gluten-Free Diet and Celiac Disease Forever and for All?" question mark. And basically, they're kind of exploring this. This one is in Nutrients, the journal Nutrients. It was published in 2018. And they're kind of talking about, okay, yeah, we know that gluten-free diet is like the only treatment for celiac disease. Like, that's been accepted for a long time. But like, is there actually a threshold of that people have on an individual level for gluten, where maybe some people can tolerate some, or maybe once they have healed very well, they could potentially add some back in? Will the disease come back? Like, would it be dangerous to suggest that? Like, all of these things are exploring. Um, so what they concluded was that there are reports from different research that show that some people, that's like key, some people, not everybody, may actually develop tolerance to gluten, and then over time potentially could reintroduce gluten, which blew my mind. And I know this is not a brand new paper, but I had never heard of this before. Have you heard of this?
Okay, so I didn't put this paper in the right place in our notes. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
But I have a paper that it's like adjacent to this, and
Oh,
it's
yeah, yeah.
called Safety of Occasional Ingestion of Gluten in Patients with Celiac Disease, a Real Life Study. It's from 2020. So, I mean, yeah, not like crazy recent, but do you want me to kind of just give you the breakdown of?
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially they report that some people with celiac disease can, same, build a degree of tolerance, which I don't want to go into like what tolerance means immunologically, but essentially, I think maybe did I say this in our episode with Sarah already?
But even if you didn't, not people might not have listened. So
This
yeah,
is
go ahead.
cool as shit. This is like, well, it's not as cool maybe as the second generation of stars giving us our macronutrients, but it's close. So if your immune system, it reacts to everything. You're what you breathe, all the crazy things in what we breathe, everything we touch. Your immune system is like, I mean, it is so mind blowing when you start to learn about it on a small level. Like every millisecond of every day, it's like reacting. Okay. When I say react though, I mean like there is some type of like, what is this? How should I react? And sometimes the reaction is like attack, which is what we think of with the immune system. But sometimes the reaction is like, we tolerate this thing. So like your immune system samples you, and you should be tolerant to self. You should be tolerant to food. But when you're not, you see autoimmune diseases or food allergies or reactions. We don't know why that happens. I remember like our immunology teacher being like, if we did, we would be rich. We would be like in the Cayman Islands somewhere, like on a yacht. Like nobody knows the answer to that. A lot of people claim like this is what's happening, or this is exactly how you cure it. The immune system is so freaking complex. So it's like when we say tolerance to gluten, I actually don't know, Hannah, in this study. My guess is that they're using tolerance like the scientific term tolerance. But I don't know. They might just mean like biopsy doesn't change or symptoms don't change, but it is good for people to know like your immune system is so complex in that way. Like don't let your immune system function be reduced down into this like memeable
Mm-hmm.
clip. It's just not like that. But so anyway, okay. That's an aside. In this paper, yeah, okay, they built a degree of tolerance and or at least not experience histological changes. So that is a tissue level change or symptom when occasionally ingesting glutinous foods. This was a group of over 1,300 people, so 1,378 patients with celiac. 8% reported, so 109 of them reported that they voluntarily ate gluten at least occasionally, about 185 grams per year.
Mm-hmm.
484 grams is a pound. So a quarter
Small.
pound gluten per year. Most did not have substantial issues. 57% of that 100, so 50 plus people did not have histological changes, and their clinical symptoms didn't change. Death rates were not different between these people and the general population. There are a couple other details I can post, but essentially like kind of supporting what you're saying, like for some people might be possible.
Okay, so this is huge. Like, this is a big deal. And when I read this, I was like, what the fuck? Like, this
Yeah,
is like
same.
changing I mean, I guess just because that's not what we were taught and that's not the common like practice in even for gastroenterologists. It's like you have celiac, you're gluten-free. You have to do that. It's very, very important. And how that affects then patients like daily lives and well-being, because if you think you have been glutened or exposed or this cross contamination, it is, I think, fairly common to be like, oh no, like this is bad, because you think about your great uncle or grandpa who died from colorectal cancer or whatever, who had celiac disease, and you're like, I don't want that to be me. Like, but it's really hard to exist in the world and go to social events and go out to eat at your favorite places and not have cross contamination.
Yeah,
And so to think
I know.
that in 20 years from now, the whole like treatment protocol will change because we understand it better and have more details. And then that all of us for this many years were like panicking and like not eating a
Panicking.
croissant like once a year or something like that. It's just like, damn. But it's so important that this is being studied. This is.
Dude, I would drink a cold beer. I would
No,
drink the coldest cold beer on a
I
hot day.
know. Same. Like the little things. When I read this, I was like, maybe I should just go get a croissant right now and eat it because I haven't had one in 12 years. Like that would
Oh,
be,
honey.
you know.
I will tell you this. I mean, this is such an aside. We went to Barcelona for our honeymoon and they have like incredible gluten-free options. Like I had a gluten-free croissant at this bakery. And same, I think we had friends, there's like these super cheap flights to Paris in the wintertime. She's gluten-free. She had these amazing gluten-free pastries. So they are around. But yes, to your point, it's like the panic that ensues. Like I remember eating a flour tortilla one night at a Mexican restaurant and I was like, in my brain, I was like, this is the best, like tortilla. And then like I was like halfway through the thought and I was like, no.
That's why it's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. So this, just to like clarify, like if you're gluten-free for medical reasons, please don't like listen to what we're saying and be like, oh, I can have a croissant.
Yeah, we're
now.
fucking stupid. Don't
Please
listen.
do not do that. Please don't do that. That would be bad. We're just talking about what could be and where the research might go to better inform clinicians, which is really
Yeah. And this is something that I think of where it's like, God, it's such a huge like influence on our culture from like a conventional standpoint. I'm going to bring in the most controversial thing ever, where it's like freaking, Anthony Fauci is like, don't wear masks. And then they're like, you need to wear masks. It's like the messaging that comes from not only what we know technically, but from understanding human behavior. It's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's based on both of those things. So it's like, technically we may know, what is it, 100, a quarter pound of wheat per year spread out across the year for some people, might not affect them. But if clinicians start to tell people who have known celiac disease and like absorption issues and all like, okay, maybe you can kind of like add it in. Sometimes it's like, in my mind, I'm like, I know exactly what would happen. I would go home and drink a beer and then I might drink 3 beers. It's like, yeah, I think maybe like if there's a way where a public health message can be communicated, more, but like humans don't do great with nuance. If they did, we'd be Joe Rogan.
Right. And that's why, like, when you start to realize that and you see the way that public health is, why the messages are constructed in the way they are, instead of being like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, or like, they don't know what they're talking about, like to understand, like, okay, they're doing this because our brains in general just cannot handle nuanced information. We have to be told specifically this is what to do and not to do. And yeah, there is a lot of gray area and individual difference for every single person. But like on average, as a whole, you can't just be like willy-nilly about it. You have to be like a hard ass and be like, no, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what people like will retain. And,
I pray that like we can make a bridge. I mean, it's part of what the podcast is about, is like, can we take a little more responsibility? Can we learn more nuanced ways? And like, to me, like visually efficient and like effective ways of communicating, because there are people that fall through the cracks in everywhere, right? With any intervention and message, but that's why it is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
is there anything we want to touch on last for this episode? I know we are going to do a part 2, y'all. So
yeah, I wonder if we should just save the
rest. Okay.
Yeah, the rest for part 2. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a huge. I mean, I probably spent like 3 or 4 hours, close to 4 hours researching
a lot.
We got a lot of information. So, yeah, hopefully this is helpful for people and they don't feel like it's too nuanced and they're like, what do I do? But we'll have a takeaway in part 2. Don't go eat croissants. That's important.
For people who are gluten-free, I just learned that the chili crisp, Momofuku chili crisp oil is not gluten-free. And I was glutening myself for many weeks. And I actually thought, I was like, I need to see a GI doc. I think I have a gut infection.
Oh, Hannah.
And then I realized that's what it was. And I was like, oh, I'm so stupid.
What's in it? Just like a wheat paste to thicken it or something?
So I think, this kind of goes with the tolerance thing. So like, I think there's no listed wheat on the allergens or anything, but it has yeast. Mm-hmm. And then on their website, it lists yeast as barley yeast. And then I found a paper that kind of looked at different like samples of yeast from barley, and some are technically gluten-free and some have a lot of gluten. And so I think what happened was I tried it. I wasn't sure. I tried it. I had no reaction. And I was like, this stuff is so good. So I was eating it 3 times a day. I was putting it on
It's
everything.
delicious. It's
And
delicious.
it's so good. Oh my God. On tofu, like drizzled. Oh,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
delicious.
Yeah.
So, and then my symptoms are getting worse and worse and worse. And I was like, this is really weird. And then I was like, oh, this is it. Took it out immediately. Got better. It was
Yeah. I mean, okay,
silly.
so just as a quick takeaway, that's so important for people. Like, if you see a resolution like that, this ain't for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's like, it's like one of those little like tragedies, one of those small T traumas where you're like, damn.
Damn, I know. And now I'm still like, it's so good. So I'm like, I could probably tolerate a
Well,
little,
you
but
we can
I'm
make
not
your
gonna do
own.
that.
I'll make
I will
some
make
and
my
I'll
own.
send it to you. Okay, we will be back with part two. We're going to cover like more on if gluten is different in Europe versus the US, kind of the different forms of reactivity, if cross reactivity is a thing, what the deal is with skin prick testing.
And symptoms like outside of GI symptoms, neurological symptoms. I would really love to talk a little bit about mental health and like gluten and how that can affect it if you're sensitive. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll be back with more soon.
All right. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Bye, everybody.